Hi, this is Lucas Pozzey. Today we're going to do a tutorial on creating different moods with CG lighting. This is to accompany an article in 3D World. Basically we're just going to use a simple scene, just a basic alley that I've set up here with a fire escape and some very simple objects. A nice little old man model provided by our friends at Turbo Squid. So yeah, let's just dive on into it. Basically, there's a lot of things to think about when you get the shot. For this shot, I've got a camera facing the character himself. It's almost like a portrait with an added background, with a little bit of depth to give you something to play with. Basically, when I start working on a shot, I think about several things. One is like, what is the mood of the scene? Is it sad? Is it happy? Is it, a triumphant moment for the character? When does it happen in the film? Things like that. Then I think about where the drama is. Is the character going through some kind of conflict? Are they are we trying to show that they're very old, or that they're very weak, or that they're very strong? You also want to know who and what is the subject. In this shot it's pretty obvious that the subject is the main character, but it won't always be that obvious. Sometimes you'll have multiple characters in your scene and they'll all be the subject, or one will need to be lit differently so that you focus your eyes on that person. It could even be an object itself, a spaceship or anything really, a little mouse. What you want to define is where you want the audience to look. So a good test that a lot of people do is just to squint your eyes, and when you see the light sources, you'll know exactly where the audience is going to look when they first see that cut. Because often a shot could only be a couple of frames long, and you need to know exactly where the eye is going to go straight away. And the most important thing to consider is, how am I emotionally affecting the audience? So what you want to think about is, when an audience looks at this shot, what are they going to feel? What are they going to think? How is it going to shake them? How is it going to shape the way that they see the story? Okay? So I've done 4 different environments. I'm just going to talk you through each one. The first one we're going to do is the night lighting rig. So basically this one is a more realistic approach to lighting an alley with a character in it. We're not going to go too far on the contrast and the saturation, or any of the shadows, or any of the lighting on the face. So what I'll always do is I'll start with the basics. So you want to start lighting the scene itself first. In the scene we've got a sky dome here. So basically find an HDRI that works for you. In this case it is a night sky rig. A nighttime HDR is very difficult to get right. Like basically if you go out and shoot an HDR at night, you're going to have a hard time getting the exact colors, getting the exact contribution that actual night sky would give you, because it's already going to be filtered, it's already going to be going through processing on the camera and everything like that. In this case, this one, it's okay. I mean, there's a gradient to the sky that's gonna, if you had a very shiny metal robot, you're probably going to want to treat this a little bit. This is going to cause you problems, like some kind of sun that sneaks into the night light, because it's going to contribute to your shadows, contribute to your colors, it's going to contribute to your reflections. In this case, I'm not super worried about it because we don't see a lot of the contribution of the color in the direct light of this, because we're in an alley. So I've just left it the way it is. Usually I'd probably paint this out and make it a little bit more neutral. Next you would look at the source of the light. So in this case we're presuming that there's a moonlight. In this case I've got it quite high so that it can creep into the alley itself. And then I've placed another little spotlight here at the back of the alley that can act as a sort of additional moonlight, just to scrape down that wall and give a little bit of a fog, but we'll see that later. So if I was to render this, basically it's pretty dark. You can see what the contribution is doing. There's a very soft fill from the sky itself. If I was to increase that, we'd see everything's quite uniform, but it is picking up quite a lot of color from the sky as well. You're getting that blue wash across the whole scene. So we're going to have to compensate for that, or you can treat the texture itself. So for now, we're just going to leave it the way it is. The next thing you'll realize is that in your scene, the set, or the department above you, has placed some nice little lanterns. These lanterns, they could be anything. They could be candles, they could be fluorescent, they could be a whole bunch of light sources in there. I've chosen to go for something a little bit warmer. So basically, I've placed a cylinder light inside, so it's an AI cylinder with just its basic settings. I've put a warm color on it, so it's I tend to use the color rather than the temperature. I think the temperature is great if you have to go exact Kelvin temperatures. Say you've got a fire or something like that, you can try to match it to the exact realistic color. I find it's a little bit more limiting because you only really have a number that kind of goes up and down the color. With this method, I find like I can pull out a little bit of green, or I can pull out a bit of blue, or I can pull out a bit of red or whatever, just to know that I have the colors in the right space, because often when they mix together in a light scene, you're not going to get the color that you initially wanted anyway. You're not going to get that temperature right. So what I've done is I've set up the cylinder light inside to simulate a dome, a lamp itself, or a bulb. Then I've got a compensating spotlight next to it. So what you want to do is be careful that you're not going to reflect this in the glass to the camera, so put it in a spot that's not going to be too obvious. I've also played with the umbra penumbra of the light itself, so you can sort of see like how wide it's going to be, things like that. So the cone angle is going to be 20, and then there's going to be a soft fall off onto the wall itself. The basic idea being that you're pretending that this light has a little bit more contribution, a little bit more direction than just a basic area light would do. And I've just done that on all of them. On this one that's a little bit closer to the camera, I shaped it a little bit more, so it's kind of pointing at the wall to give a little bit more texture on the bricks. And just to give you a little bit more fall off to control it, when you see that in the camera, it's going to be a little bit more pleasing. So let's have a look with that. So as you can see, it adds a lot of different color cues to the scene itself. It breaks up the moonlight itself, and it just gives you some kind of contrast. And it doesn't look too fake yet. What we do next is, once you've got something balanced for the background, you can see the character's not picking up a lot of light because all he's got is the ambient light. What you can presume is, yeah, this light's probably going to hit this character, and this light's probably going to affect him, and probably the moonlight's going to give him something a little bit more. So what I've done is added some harsh lights themselves. So basically we've got a collection of a 3-light setup. What you want to do is, if you're doing 3-point lighting like this, is to try and maintain the rules themselves. So you want to have a rim light, which I've got here. In this case, the side light is almost like a key, and it's almost like a fill. So you basically want to have a fill light that's filling in any shadows, and then in this case I'm pretending that the key from the moon is actually coming from up high, so it's almost like a secondary rim light from the other side. But because it's a different color, we can sort of get away with it. If you had two rim lights the same color, yeah, in this scene you could probably assume that this lamp up here, this lantern, is also giving another rim light to the character's face. You could play that if you really wanted to. It's all about what the mood of the character is and how much you want to accentuate his look. So yeah, this is the case. I think that's probably a bit bright, so I'd probably bring that down. Just to keep it in the realm of nighttime. You want to balance this idea that he's still being lit by the moon, even though there's these other lights. These other lights are contributing little things. If I turned off that moonlight, nothing really happens. So it looks like a lot of the contribution's coming from this side light here. And then this is the rim light itself. So you can see the color is it's got the same cues as it does from the moonlight itself. So it sort of fits, and it's like, well, it is a bit strong. Would a moon really do that? No, in actual fact it wouldn't, but you want to give a little bit of movie license. And if we've got enough fill, all it's really doing is adding a bit of texture to the face and a bit of detail to show that there is a bit of emotion going on in the face. If you had a proper skin in there, if you had some hair and some groom reflecting and picking up some of that speck, you'd get a lot more realism out of the lighting itself. Okay, so just stop that. So yeah, that's the basic moonlight rig. What I did for the test was I also added some Atmos. So for this I've just ignored it. But if I turn that on, it's pretty crazy. Okay, sorry, I'll put that back down. Put this back up where it was. So as you can see, it's a little bit more soft. This is a bit crazy. Once again, you can play with that. Like, it's probably too much fog coming through there. Maybe it only needs to go down one. I tend to use AI exposure rather than intensity. I know intensity is sort of an old school 3D value. I just find, like, use one or the other. For me, I've come from like a camera background, so I'd rather use exposure because I know exactly how much it's going to be. Well, I look at the light and I say, well, it's probably one stop too much. So if I pull that down, I know I'm going to get one stop less. And likewise in little brackets of half a stop, things like that. So that's the only reason that I use this. The other thing you want to worry about is this radius value. For moonlight, I've pushed this directional light to 80, which is pretty extreme. So what that means is you're going to get very, very soft shadows. You're hardly going to get any definition at all. If I was to move this moon spotlight, if I isolate that actually, and if I lit that up a little bit more, you can see what it's doing. Hide that Atmos again. So you can see it's quite heavy shadows affecting the character, because this is an AI radius of 5. You can go right down to 1. It's going to be a very harsh shadow. So you wouldn't want that unless you know that the source itself is extremely close to the character. Like, this is a very unrealistic shadow that you wouldn't really get in real life. If I push that right up to 10, it's starting to get a little bit softer, and you'll see when the render completes that you're getting a little bit more fall off that you would probably get from a real light that was pretty close. Like, it's still pretty close, but it's not, you know, right up next to him. And so on. If I went all the way up to 80, you can see the light wraps around the face. It doesn't have as harsh shadows in it. You're getting a little bit more realism. So you can presume that the softer the shadows, the further away the light is. And moonlight is generally a fairly soft source, just because it's diffused, it's reflected, it's not a harsh key like the sun is. So we'll see that in the next part. Okay, so next we're going to look at the daylight rig. So once again, here's one I prepared earlier. So I've turned that Atmos off again. So basically, we start the same way again. With daylight and sunshine, it's a very common ask, but most likely, you know, a lot of films, unless you're working on certain superhero films, you're probably going to want a more angled sunlight, a more afternoon, softer light. The reason being that middle of the day sun, it's very, very harsh. It's very strong, and it's very hard to get the right emotion that you want from somebody's face, because you're just going to get harsh shadows, and if they move their head, you know, you can position lights all you want, but you're going to lose a lot of that feeling. You're going to lose a lot of that detail and that read in their face. So anyway, what we're going to do now is we're going to look at a more afternoon light, I've pulled this HDR. It's sun right on the horizon. You can see it's got this sort of orange glow coming off it. Usually what I do is once again paint out the sun, try to get a more even sky color. You can go for this blue. It's probably going to be quite nice. The green, that'll be fine. It's going to add to it. But what you want to do is if you're rendering a specular character like I said, shiny robot, or even an actor with highlights, you're going to see this hot source. So you don't want to have two sources in the eyes. So what I generally do is paint this out of this texture, copy over some trees so that you've got a nice even dome, and then copy this texture alone onto another dome and use that as a sun. Or in this case, what we've done is we've just used a directional light with a similar color. So I just sampled the color, not really, from this light itself, and then I've done some adjustments to grade it later. So as we can see, I'll just turn these off so that we can see what it's going to look like. That one's off again. So as you can see, this is what you're going to get from that basic setup. So probably your sunlight is going to be a lot stronger in real life. What I've done is I've held this down just because I'm going to compensate with another light onto the character's face, and I don't want the directional to be the only source. So as you can see, we're already getting quite a hot speck on this metal. There's a highlight in the eye. There's a lot of fill coming from this directional light onto the walls already, so just from that direction. So what you want to do is you want to find a nice angle where it's going to work for you on this character, because that's going to define where everything else is going to come from, where the fill is going to come from, where the key is going to come from, everything. So in this case, what I like to do is keep the directional attributes themselves. So rather than using any Z or rotating in any other weird way, I just think, well, the X off the ground is how high the sun's going to be. In this case, a 20. I've put it as minus 20, but it's 20-degree rotation off a flat 180. So you imagine that like this sun is actually a lot lower than that. It's probably more like a 10, but I just went for this because I felt like it was a little bit more fitting to the emotion we're going for. You could find another HDR that has a better light to it. The problem is that the higher the sun goes in the image, the different color it's going to be, and the harsher it's going to be on the shadows. So that's the things you have to worry about. The other thing I did was I've pushed the angle on this one to 15. So a real sunlight, it's going to be pretty sharp shadows. I just didn't want it to be too harsh. So I'm taking the liberty that because the sun is sort of on the horizon, there's a lot of interference and it can soften off a lot of the shadows just to give something a little bit more pleasing. I find like harsh sunlight is a little bit hard to deal with emotional scenes. So once you're happy with the direction of the sun and the dome itself, you can start thinking about other lights. And like I said, this can be dark. It's fine. You would get shadows in an alley in the afternoon, but we know that we go walking in the daytime and it's very rare for something to be that dark by your eyes. You might be able to take a picture like that, but your actual eyes will know that light bounces, sun bounces, and things get filled up. So what I've done is I've opted for some extra lights in the background. The idea being that I'm pretending that these fire escapes are actually blocking some of the light and you're getting some more interesting shadows. There's one thing that can go horribly wrong with sunlight is that there won't be any occlusion. There won't be anything stopping the light from getting in. There won't be any shadows. And in CG, if you don't have those things, you're just going to get flat lights. So as you can see on this, there's nothing blocking that, so you're just getting a flat face on it. So what I've done is I've just created these lights, and they're just spotlights. Why are they spotlights? Because they're more directional. There's a little bit more possibilities with the shadows themselves. So once again, I've gone for a 10 radius, which is pretty sharp shadows. They're pretty strong. The cone angle is quite tight, so they're going to be focused on specific areas. I do want to keep it at penumbra, just because if you have a strong, like a tight cutoff, like less than 30 on this penumbra, you're gonna have super weird looking spotlights where they'll just cut off halfway through. Sometimes that can work, most of the time it doesn't. So because these are affecting the walls themselves, we want them to have a bit of a softer fall off, just so you can't really feel where the source is. You know that it's the sun, but you don't know that somebody's stuck a little light on the fire escape here. You want to feel like it all belongs in the same area. Also, on that note, what I want to do is hold on to the angle of the directional light as much as I can. So if the directional light is coming from a certain angle from the horizon, so should these backlights. You can see they're not quite obeying that rule, but they're within reason. You know, like you start from that same direction and you just sort of warp it a little bit to try and get it, you know, in the same area. So what I've also done to these lights is I've added gobos just to break them up a little bit. You'll see it in the render itself. There will be sort of like streaks or little spots on the wall, things like that, but you want to try and avoid showing the texture itself. So here on this one, you can see that there's a gobo that I've made. It's basically just a map of some noise. So you could do all sorts of things. You can get proper caustics, you could get proper tree leaves, you could do a picture of anything and put that on the light and get something interesting happening in there. If you wanted to paint something that was more similar to the fire escape, that would also work to simulate that kind of thing. Anything you really want, you can plug into a gobo and give something interesting. You'll see when we put the Atmos on how much it affects it, and that sort of God rays, sun streaming kind of feeling. So the next thing we're going to want to do is add the character lights. As you can see, it changes it quite a lot. It's basic 3-point lighting setup once again. I would say if you were going to have a character that's moving or moving through the scene, you definitely want to have these lights further away, just to compensate for their intensity. They'll behave the same way, sort of. It's just that they'll need to give the character room so that he doesn't go into shadow as soon as he takes a step forward, things like that. So basically, as you can see, it's added quite a lot of light to the character's face. So what we'll try to do is keep the same feel. So this key that's an extra spotlight, it's going to be the same color as the directional light. It's going to be obviously a lot stronger, but it's going to be the same angle. You can see like the angle of the sun itself is very, very similar. Technically, you could probably get away with using the directional. I just feel like in this case it would blow out the background a little bit too much, and you want the focus to be on the character itself. So what's going to happen is if you do just add that harsh light, you can see like you've got very heavy shadows there. This is an AR radius of 20, which, as we said before, it's probably a bit soft on the shadows for sunlight, but we're assuming that the sun is quite low and it's getting caught up in a lot of filtering along the way, so let's assume that you can get these sort of softer shadows on there. So the first thing you'd want to do is add some extra fill. The fill itself from the sky is going to be too strong, and like I said before, if I was to push that fill from the sky dome, you're going to get a lot of color coming into that, and that might be what you want. You know, like you might want some of the blues and some of the whites to come back in and change the color of the shadows and give it a little bit more of a real overall feel. In this case, I want to keep that afternoon glow. I want it to feel like, you know, there's that warmth, and that's why we're going to hold on to the overall sun color of this scene. You know, there's tiny little bits, but really everything's being hit by that sun. It's really washing it out. And that gives you that emotional feeling. It gives you that feeling that you get in Magic Hour, where, you know, the sun's going down and it's just that beautiful feeling of the sun hitting your face. And choosing to go from this angle of it immediately gives you empathy with the character to feel what that sun feels like. And that's something that everyone knows, you know, like what light feels like on your face. You could easily have it coming across his face, or, you know, a little bit higher, a little bit more shadows onto the head itself. It would give a totally different feel. It would give a totally different mood and look for the character itself. So in this case, I'm assuming, you know, he's not such an evil old man in this one. He's a little bit more likable, and he might still be sad because he's got a sad face. But maybe he's going through something that's a little bit more positive, right? The last light that I put on him was just a basic rim. So once again, it's just coming from behind him. What that'll do is exactly the same as it was doing to the nighttime. Let's just see a little bit more contribution. So it's pretty much the same position. All it's going to do is, like I said, if you've got any hair, if you've got any groom, peach fuzz, anything on this character that's going to give you a little bit of life, this rim is going to help pull him off the background and make him stand out. And that's what you always want. You want the audience to be like, well, I know where the main character is in this shot. He's right here. So yeah, I mean, this, I feel like if I was going to do a raw render of this, I'd probably pull down a lot of the values. The spec is way too hot. A lot of this light on his face is way too hot. That's something you want to balance out, and maybe go a little bit under, so that in Nuke they have something to play with. They can still push the values, and they've still got the detail in there. The last thing you want to do is blow it out so much that there's no detail rendering anymore. You still want to get that texture of the face. And the last thing you want to add to this scene is just Atmos. Once again, it'd be great to have effects Atmos, or like a nice sim, a nice volume, just something very subtle. In this case, we're just using the AI volume, atmospheric volume. It's just a really basic setting. It's way too heavy on this, so I'd probably pull that down. But yeah, you get the idea. So right now, yeah, it's hardly any density, but there's a lot of anisotropy. So what you want to do is maybe, sorry, other way, pull it down so it's not as affected. You may also want to play with different lights. I've changed a lot of these light settings so that they're not contributing to the volume as much. This one can come right down. And actually, let's just put that back up so we can see what's changing. So it's going to be on 1. If I was to, let's say, push these lights a little bit more, this is the one on the back. You can see it's contributing a lot to the scene, but you know, not so much to the volume. Let's try this one in the middle. If I was to push this up, you can see the streaks starting to come through. When that renders fully, you'll see like the gobo affecting it. You'll see the fire escape affecting the light. It's just little things to shine a little shadow through. You can also, once again, play with the radius itself, play with the cone angle and the penumbra. These are a lot more powerful in volume than they are on the actual environment. So those are good tools to have. And just play with it. Get something that's interesting. Get something that's giving you that feeling. Is it a very hazy day? Is it a very hazy city? Maybe it's a smoggy atmosphere. Maybe it's a beautiful valley atmosphere. You know, like sometimes you go out in a meadow and it'll give you that sort of morning feel, where you have a little bit of fog or mist kind of in the air, adding a little bit of volume to your scene. So just have a look at real life, have a look at photos that you love, and real paintings, and see what gives you that feeling of warmth or different emotions. So the next thing we're going to do is the superhero light rig, which I've affectionately called the Marvel light rig. I'll turn the Atmos off again so we can see what it looks like. So this is if you were to go for a more high contrast look. I think superhero films, they tend to go for a more high concept, high contrast, dynamic range look, so that it lends itself to more like a cartoon or a graphic novel or something where it could be painted and values of things are a little bit more extreme. So we start off the same way that we start off with a real scene. In this case I've got a different HDR. This one has quite a lot of different colors running through it. If you were to go for something reflective, once again, it's probably going to upset you. It's probably going to give you more trouble than you need. In this case, there's a lot of these pinks and warmths and oranges coming through here that you really don't want on a night scene. This is, obviously this is a sunset. It's not exactly a night sky, but I'm using it as an example for a night fill that we could use. If I was to use this in production, I would probably pull a lot of this and dupe that over the top, or patch it over the top of all of this, and take out a lot of this warmth from here, or just find a colder nighttime HDR. For the directional light, once again, we're going to use this as a moon. In this case, it's quite blue. What you might find is if you're going for a sort of Disney moonlight, it's going to be super blue. And, there's nothing really wrong with it. People will believe that the moon is blue, even though in real life it's not. It's actually fairly white. It's whiter than the sun is. So what you want to do is feel like it's this middle ground of believability. So in this case, it is blue, but it's not crazy blue. So that's what I'm trying to go for. So you can see, like when we render this, it's picking up a lot of that color from the sunset, which in this case we're going to live with that. Okay, so it's fine. I think it kind of adds to some kind of contrast of color, because you've got this blue moonlight reflecting off the spec values, and then you've got this kind of warm fill. So it could be night, and in this case it could be coming from anywhere. If you don't see the sky, you can go with a little bit more hyperrealism on this rig. The next thing I would do is, once again, let's go off these lanterns. Let's use them. They're there in the scene, and it would look weird if there was nothing in them. So for this one, we're going to push this reality a little bit. Like what would really happen in lanterns if they weren't hyper real? Most lanterns, they're based off candle, they're based off Kelvin, they're based off tungsten, so they're going to be a lot warmer. But in this case, I wanted to go for a little bit more of a cyberpunk kind of Blade Runner-y neon feel. And that's why there's a whole bunch of neon lights in this light rig. So once we've got those positioned, they could add to the character. Obviously you can see they're not really contributing much outside of their area at the moment. I haven't put those spotlights on like I did on the other one, just because I want to use these more as an aesthetic thing in the background rather than a source key. Next we've got some neon lights. So if you had like a nice floor texture, which I don't really have here, and some kind of wet reflective light, this is the stuff that you really want to play with and get something happening. It could be really interesting. I've got a red neon up there. I've got some more red ones kind of coming from the top. So once again, like as if they're off screen, coming from above. There could be a sign of a window or a shop or something up there. There's also some blue lights coming from the alleys, so if I was to push those in the render, you can see them coming through here. So it's just something to break up the redness of it. I'd probably push that even bigger, you know, like maybe it needs to spread a bit more up the wall. Just be careful that it doesn't take too much attention. Obviously with an area light, when you scale it up, it's going to have more intensity and it's just going to take your focus. So at the moment, if you squint your eyes on this image, there's no way you're looking at the character. I mean, you could probably use that to your advantage if you wanted a silhouette, but it wouldn't work in this environment because you'd have to push the background a lot more. You'd want to push all of these alley values more and keep the character in silhouette if that's what you're really going for, and it would be a really interesting look. But you can't go halfway. You can't just be like, well, if you look there, it's okay, because you need to look straight at this person's eyes for the point of the story. So I've also got a key red light here, closer up to the camera. So the idea is similar to what we were doing in the other night scene, where I'm just sort of scraping it across here. You could definitely get something way more interesting than that. If I had proper brick models in there or better displacement, you could probably get some really nice roughness coming across there. Don't be afraid of like spec hits and things like that. People get worried about them just because they look a little bit fake. You can take care of that later. There's better ways of doing it, and I'll show you that. So yeah, that's the basics of it. Just lighting the scene. You could add way more neons in here, but the idea being that this red light, I don't know where the source is in the shot because you don't see it. It could be anything. It could be like a massive Coke sign in the back, or it could be a shop window or anything. There could be a shop down here. And that's the idea. What you want to do is create the feeling that there is more life. There is more than what this character is going through. And that gives your imagination something to run away with. So basically you say, well, like we were doing in the other one, there was a light coming from this alley. That means that there is more in this world. You can go through that alley if you wanted to. This character's facing the other direction, so he's not going to go down there. So whatever you put in there, it's contrasting towards what they're thinking, because they're looking at another direction. They're looking off the camera. So what clues we're going to get to what they're looking for is probably going to be in their eyes and on their face. Okay, so next thing we do, obviously, we'll go for the character. So in this case, we've got something a little bit more stylized. So what you'll see is, once again, 3-point lighting. It's just a little bit more extreme on this one. So what we've got is, we've got a neon blue light. So playing with that idea that the blue light is coming from off screen. So we've already planted the idea that there's an alley here. There is actually an alley here, you can't see. And there's another little bit of blue here. So what we're going to do is say, yep, that blue light is a theme and a motif of this shot, and it's going to leak through on here. It's also coming through around there, and it could even be linked to another lantern light. If you do cut to a wider shot of this, you will have to think it through. Like if you do see the source, you probably have to put something in there, or just move it further away so it's off screen even in the wide shot. So I'll turn this off for now. So you can see the contribution of the blue light. It's similar to what that rim light was doing before, that we were using to cut the character off the background, but basically this one's giving a little bit more detail, and it's giving us something of an eyelid, something of a nose, something falling off the mouth. It's just accentuating this part of the mouth just to give us a little bit more detail of like, do you know what he's thinking? Do you know what he really looks like? And just a little bit of mystery. The red light coming off the background is something to contrast the face as well. It's giving the idea that this character is in two minds. There might be a blue and a red side. There might be a good and a bad side. There might be a cold and a violent side. Red could be giving you a lot of cues as to whether it's sexuality, whether it's danger, whether it's fire, whether it's all these different things that your mind instantly conjures up. When it's neon, it's a little bit harder to tell because it's sort of like it's kind of punching you in the face and saying, well, this is a red light. What you want to do is like hold on to that belief that red means certain things and use it sparingly, use it the way that you should. And blue, it's cold, it's emotionless, it's things like that. It's nighttime, and use that sparingly as well. So having said that, using sparingly, I'm going to use something extreme, which is an uplight. And what you want to do is in this case, this is going to give an evil feel. The reason for that is we tend to associate characters who are lit from the bottom with being evil, just because that's kind of implanted in our memories and in our reactions. If you were to photograph a portrait and you saw in the character's eye that the light source was coming from below, your mind would tell you that that character's evil. It's a very strange psychological thing, that you already know that if light's coming from behind, they're up to no good. Because in this case, we've got a sharp shadow on this character uplight. It's quite a small light that I've scaled right down. It's an area light in this case. You could also use a spotlight. The reason I used an area light like this is because it's a disc. If I had proper eye textures in there, you would get that spot. You would get a dot, and it would show up in the character's eye, and it would be too low for you to believe that they're good. And that's what you want to do, is this uneasy feeling of like, this is wrong. If he was lit from the 3/4, more like this one, like we were doing on the sun, he wouldn't look so evil. He'd look a little bit nicer and just sort of lost. So that's the idea that we're going for here, that he's a little bit bad and up to no good. So the next thing, obviously, we're going to add some Atmos again. So we'll just turn that back on. In this one, it's quite a bit more subtle. So what we're going for is not an overall Atmos. The idea is that these lanterns are leaking a bit into the air. So it's almost as if it's a very soft nighttime mist rather than an overall fog. So you'll get that. You'll get this kind of haze around lights from a lens, just from the treatment, just from shooting into a light source, things like that. There's different filters you can put on a camera, so you could go away with, adding a little bit more fog coming off this. Maybe it's more directional, maybe it's, offering a little bit more leak coming through the alley, things like that. There's a whole bunch of things you can do with fog to add to the scene. In this one, I feel like it just gives you that kind of Jack the Ripper, London fog, just really subtly. It's the only subtle thing about this light rig. So the last one we're going to do is the cold or cloudy light rig. This one is the feeling that it's raining or it's cold and overcast, that sort of thing. Once again, let's start the same way. We've got an overcast sky dome, HDR. This one, look, it's a weird choice of texture for me. I think it's probably too bright. If you were going for photorealism, you'd probably want something a little bit softer overall, just to give you a nice diffuse look. The idea that you're going for is that you want, a texture in clouds, but you want an overall softness. You don't want any shadows, you don't want any bright keys, and there's probably going to be a key coming from the highlight areas of this environment. Nevertheless, we also have, once again, directional light. This one has quite a soft shadow as well. It's on a 40 AI angle, so it's not going to be as harsh as the sunlight. So we can have a look at what that looks like. Turn off the Atmos again. So as you can see, it's quite soft. You don't really see directionality anywhere. You don't see where the light is aiming at the character from. And in a way, that's what we want in this environment. We want the idea that that the rain is diffusing all the light, if there was rain, and that there isn't any harsh key, there isn't anything colorful or light. And that's what you want to do. If you're going for an overcast look, a cold realism sort of look, then that's why they pull out the saturation. You don't want the color coming through. You know, this HDR, it's colorful on the roofs, but really, if you were to look around, like this rock, if that was lit by the sun, it would be a totally different color. You know, all these trees would be a completely different color. So even though there is color in the image, it's extremely desaturated compared to what it would be like if it was a sunny day. So the next thing we want to do is, like we did on the other sunlight, is we're going to add some pocket lights into the background here. So they're very similar to what we're doing. Once again, they're sort of up high, they're off camera. In this case, they're sort of pointing to the wall with a softer fall off. So similar umbra, penumbra. And let's just see how that affects the light. So you can see it's pushed it a little bit more. So what that's done is it's something very opposite to what the sun was doing, whereas we were focusing on the character before, and now we're going to give little pockets around the character itself, just to show the evenness and, you know, like there's an overall lighting to this scene, there's an overall feeling and an non-directional source to it. But that doesn't mean it has to be boring. We can still have differences between light and dark. Light and dark. We can still have specular values. We can still have contrast. We can still have detail. It's just have to be very subtle about it. So when we come to lighting the character, it is 3 points, but I've only used 2 lights. So just to confuse the message. In this case, I'm pretending that the fill light is the dome light itself. So, you know, in all cases, that's usually the way. Like in CG, you want to use a dome as much as you can, just because you have a tendency, if you don't have a dome, to have these black bits that don't exist in a real photograph. You can put the contrast down in a real photograph and you can get extreme blacks, but not like CG, not devoid of any light at all. And people get really scared of that in CG images if there's something black in your render, like black. So a dome is always a good way to get around that. It's just going to fill in anything softly that might otherwise be black and not hit by any rays. So in this case, we're using this as a key. So it's a big area light. It should be, you know, if this was characters once again moving around, I'd pull that way back and have as a soft overall light hitting the character. This one is just a soft fill to fill in any of the shadows that top light is doing. So as you can see, it's still quite subtle. It's still very subtle. The difference with adding those character lights is that now you don't look at the background, you look at the character. And you can see that difference when there's an overall fill light, you know, and a key, and a directional light. Yes, you can still see the character standing out, but your eye doesn't go straight to it. Probably your eye would go back to here. So when you squint, you're just going to give it a little bit more detail just to look into. So this area light is doing 2 things. It's adding a key. You know, you can see there is a soft shadow in here. Maybe if I turn this off, you can see that there are darker areas where the light is hitting. So due to that high angle, we're still getting highlights on different parts of the face. We're still getting definition on the texture of the light, of the texture of the character. So this is fine. I just don't think it looks like sunlight, like cloudy light. So what you want to do is add this in as if the light is bouncing around, and that's what it's going to do in rain. It's gonna filter and it's gonna bounce around all through the atmosphere and all through the different objects that are around it, and just diffuse everything. It's gonna fill everything. So that's what you want to do. You want to get the feeling that it's filling everything, but at the same time still hold on to that texturing, still hold on to that directionality. So this is as far as I would go, is like if I was to push that key, you know, up to, you're going to see that that's too much. Like that's a light that's being shone on someone's face, you know, that's not a diffused light coming from above. So you might get that in films where the character is that bright, and possibly in comp you might even push it that far. But to start with, as a more realistic approach, we want to hold it back and just give something a little bit softer. And that's what it'll do. It'll give this character a feeling like he's not that important to have the sun shone in his face. He's not really worth the direction of the light. The direction of the sun is a mimicry of a spotlight in a theater. Like if you have a spotlight on something, you know that's where you're supposed to look. So in this case, we want the opposite. We want you to look at the character, but we want you to know that he's not that important. He's not important enough for the sun to feel that he needs color, and that he needs light, and that he needs warmth. So that's the idea of this rainy, cold realism feel. So yeah, once again, once we finish with the character, let's add some atmos. In this case, I'd love to have some rain in there, a 2D element, or some effects, or anything that's sort of falling through the shot. Some nice wet ground, wet textures, wet objects. It'd really add to this, to the feeling of coldness, and to the interest of the shot. You know, you get a lot more contrast, you get a lot more different highlights and things all around the area, but you'd hold on to this setup. And that's the idea. Try not to give yourself away. Try not to give the sources away too much in this kind of light. You don't want to feel like anything's been placed for the benefit of the shot. You just want to feel the subtlety of it. So yeah, in general, I'd say that's the 4 different light rigs. I try not to add too many lights. You know, like there's a tendency to just be like, well, what do I need? Oh, I need another rim, or this part of this character's ear isn't lit. Rather than adding another light, which can be an easy addition, just try to find that angle. Try to find the edge of it. Maybe it's a matter that you need to scale up the area light. Maybe it's a matter that you need to change the penumbra or the angle of the spotlight. Maybe it's just adding a gobo or a fall off or a decay or anything like that. Just anything you can do to hold on to the idea that you're not using too many lights, then it'll just be a lot easier to give that realism feel and to give that sort of overall feel that everything fits together. And that's the easiest thing to do in CG, is just like have everything separate, have the character stand out from the background, have the, different light sources just be too bright and too over the top. So you want to always try not to disconnect your character from the background. Let them sit in that world, but let them stand out from it. And I don't mean that in an emotional way, I just mean like your eye has to go to see that character. That's where you look in the shot. Okay? So yeah, I guess in general, just go and look at real images. Look at paintings. Look at Renaissance paintings and how they used light. Look at beautiful photographs that move you. Look at anything that affects you emotionally and ask yourself why. Like, how does the light work? How does the color work? How does the character pose? How does the texture work? How do those things add to your emotional experience of that image? And then try and recreate it. Try and recreate images. Try to recreate moods and see how you feel. How much atmosphere do you use? How much fog is there in the air? How much light bleed is there? How much does the light affect the environment and the character in those beautiful images or photography? And think about what happens in the eyes. It's really important part of lighting a character. I haven't got a proper texture in here. It's just a marble thing. But if you had like a photoreal character, look at how eyes affect how they look. Look at how the skin reacts and things like that. And the little subtle changes that add to movement and motion and mood. And that's going to be a great start. So yeah, I hope this has helped. Good luck. Any questions, just let me know. Thanks.